In our last video, you answered the question, is college still worth it? If you haven't seen it, you should check it out. It's linked right here. Today, we're back at the Cardinal Newman Society Leaders Summit, and we're here to answer a new question. What is the history of the Catholic Church and education? But more importantly, why does that matter? To get us started, we're talking to Kyle Washut, president of Wyoming Catholic College. Come with us.
So at the very beginning of the church, there's the proclamation of the gospel. But very early on, we realize the gospel takes over the whole person. And so that immediately raises questions about how we're forming that person educationally. The schools at this point are dominated principally by the Roman and Greek tradition, which is really deeply embedded with a pagan tradition. And so within the 2nd century already, we see two different examples. We see St. Gregory, the wonder worker, St. Gregory Thaumaturgus, go to Alexandria. He's pursuing law studies in Beirut, and ends up going to Caesarea in the Middle East and meeting Origen. And he describes Origen teaching him the whole range of the things there are to know: mathematics, logic, philosophy, plundering the gold out of Egypt, right? Giving this wide, comprehensive worldview deeply imbued with the Christian gospel. The other model of education we see very early on, roughly maybe just a little less than a generation after St. Gregory, is that of St. Anthony the Great. St. Anthony's around 20 years old. He hears the gospel proclaimed, sell everything you have and come follow me. And so Anthony does that, and he goes out into the wilderness, and he describes being out there without any books, without any teachers, but speaks about being in the wilderness as reading the book of nature, reading this book that God's written and learning about it.
So already we have two distinct models of education. On the one hand, a classical approach, but taking a holistic view. And on the other hand, going out into nature, experiencing God firsthand, reflecting on that, and coming to learn. But how did those two models become the education we understand today?
The tradition develops in different ways. The empire changes, and things utterly collapse in the West. And so the West, we first see this movement to sort of blend those two approaches, and we get the monastic school system, especially under St. Benedict. This idea of what Cardinal Newman will call the first great teacher of the West is St. Benedict, in the sense that he establishes an immersive school system, which Cardinal Newman again will describe as a school system focused on poetic education. It's experiential, it's communal, it's in the wilderness, it's in the book of nature. And that really develops and dominates for a long time until we get to the next great revolution in Christian education that Cardinal Newman describes, which is the emergence of the Christian university. And he says that we see as the Dominican teacher. And the Dominican teacher really doubles down less on the experiential wilderness approach to the education, and more on the approach that we saw in St. Gregory in that early 2nd century, the gathering a worldview, an integrated worldview, of reality, of the study of reality using philosophy and science and mathematics. And really we see that Aquinas especially is a key character of that. And that then dominates for the next several centuries until we get to the third great teacher that Ignatius describes, which is Ignatius of Loyola. And there we're focusing on a much more practical kind of education, the teaching that's very interior, but reflecting on how do I perfect myself in a particular profession, in a particular craft.
If that last model of education sounds familiar, that's because that is broadly what colleges and universities do today. In many ways, it dominates our understanding of what college is supposed to do, to prepare us to go out and to get a job. But if that isn't solely the purpose of college, then what is? And more importantly, how do we change that expectation?
John Cardinal Newman says, what's really interesting, he says in the modern world, the church needs to find an approach to education that reincorporates all three. Reincorporates this Benedictine wilderness approach to education, the Dominican integrated worldview, and the Jesuit practical engagement. And I do think that's the real challenge, especially then what it means for a Catholic university to re-engage with this poetic engagement with the wilderness, with the book of nature. How does that work? Coupled with this Dominican contemplative, coupled with the Jesuit. And that's really the challenge of contemporary modern education.
At Wyoming Catholic College, they're bridging that gap in interesting ways. I'll let President Washut explain more.
What we really need is, I think, to immerse ourselves in a community. But when we immerse ourselves in a community, there's various obstacles to a forming of that kind of authentic Christian community. One of those is, I think, the distraction of social media, the distraction of the cell phone. So I think part of the educational call right now is a fast in some way from the distraction. Now, when you say a fast, I don't mean go completely Amish and we never have any relation with technology, but I do mean that there's a kind of intentional fast to allow for this deeper engagement. Joseph Pieper in the 1940s talked about the need to learn to see again, to really be attentive, to really contemplate. And that was when the big distractions were neon signs and black and white television. Now we've got all of those distractions and more in our pocket, and some kind of a fast, I think, is really important. Some kind of intentional formation of community around the common good of study. But again, this conviction that study is going to transform my whole life. It's going to form my mind and then trickle down and express it in moral habits, in habits of memory, and habits of sensation. And I think things like memorizing poems together, singing together, those kind of things are really helpful for cementing the community and identifying this link between heart and head. And then lastly, again, this is coming out of Wyoming Catholic College, but very much a re-engagement with reality. Very much an immersion in the natural world in a small group, in a group where you're fundamentally sharing the basics of life together. Go on a backpacking trip, go on a hike together. Whether you do a 3-week backpacking trip like we do, or you do just a short hike together, those kind of experiences of nature together as a community are really going to set the groundwork for that deep reflection and acquiring that integrated incarnational view of reality.
While this conversation has been largely about collegiate education, it's important to remember that education is much broader than that. Dr. Helena Oriana helps to put that into perspective for us.
This is the human project across life. As soon as we are born, even before we're born, actually, there's a lot of evidence that in the womb we are learning. But the broader project of being a human is this constant education in who we are, who others are, but also what the world is. So I think if we limit it to a timeline, then we do get frantic and we do get a sense of we got to get it all done. But I think it's this capacity for attention and reflection and curiosity. So that those are some of the key skills, like within the safety of a trusting relationship, to start to notice those pieces of your experience, to reflect on them, and then to accurately ascribe meaning to them, whether it's narrative meaning about what it means for me or the broader meaning of the world that we can come to know.
That's it for today's episode. If you enjoyed it, give us a like and share it with somebody else who might enjoy it. Subscribe if you haven't already subscribed. Hit the bell icon so you're first to know when we have new episodes. Next week, we have a great episode with Monsignor James Shea. You're not going to want to miss this. My name is Darnell Miller. Thank you for watching.